Proud Boys leader, Enrique Tarrio, has been sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for seditious conspiracy. This is the longest sentence that anyone associated with January 6th has received so far. It is rare, and we could talk more about this. It is rare for there to be a seditious conspiracy charge, period. It is generally reserved for, in the recent past, Al-Qaeda cells, jihadist entities that wanted to or tried to or plotting to blow up buildings, take down airplanes. That's usually where you see a seditious conspiracy charge emerge in the federal court system. And here, 22 years. It's stunning when you see what the average sentences are for things like murder and rape and heinous crimes in this country, far less than 22 years. And Clay, there's a lot here, and I want to dive into the legality of this with you in just a moment. But I want to remind everybody, we're told that Tarrio, who was not even at the Capitol on January 6th, he was in Maryland, I believe, but he wasn't on site. He didn't attack anyone. He didn't harm anyone. But he is facing now, or has been given 22-year sentence. I just want to remind everybody, this is from the New York Times, Clay, May 31st, 2020. Despite an 11 p.m. curfew imposed by Mayor Bowser and the activation of the National Guard, protests near the White House fueled by anger over the police killing of George Floyd spiraled out of control on Sunday night. Demonstrators were hit in the head with canisters of tear gas. Some protesters broke into offices. Others started fires, one of which may have spread, actually it did spread, by the way, to the basement of St. John's, the Episcopal Church that has been attended by at least once by every chief executive going back to James Madison. The protesters claimed a slice of Lafayette Square, the dividing line with the police on Saturday night. They got closer to the White House. They wrote graffiti with America, with KKK written in America. There was tear gas. There were rocks. There were bottles thrown. There were police officers assaulted. There were threats against the White House. Clay, what was that? Nobody got 20 years in federal prison. Nobody even got years in federal prison. That was outside the White House. But
even
it was Trump
worse,
as president.
They were praised. And remember this. I always think this is an interesting analogy. When they were threatening to storm the White House, and they were tearing down barricades, and they were lighting fires, and they were engaging in clearly violent behavior, do you know what they did, Buck? They were so concerned about the president's health that they sent him down to a safe room in the White House. Do you know what the media did? They ridiculed Trump for being a coward. Do you remember that? Do you remember that whole storyline?
Yes.
Compare that to how they treated everyone who was threatened in any way in the media's mind by any of the Jan 6 protesters. Oh, those Jan 6 protesters were violent terrorists intent to kill all these different congressmen and women, senators. Everyone who fled was a hero. Everyone who hid was in mortal peril. Just look at the way the media covered the stories. The White House is threatened by left-wing protesters, and the Secret Service, it's not like this is a Trump decision, says, sir, we need you to move down to a more secure area. Trump's a coward. Look at him running. Everybody flees the January 6th protesters, also with security telling them they needed to be fleeing. And what is the way that they are treated? They are treated as if they were in mortal peril, and thank goodness the security was there to protect them from all of these deranged Jan 6 people, which, by the way, I've been fired up about this for a long time. But when you compare, it's not even just the protesters, although that's a good analogy, Buck. When you compare what's going on in Washington, D.C., with actual violent criminals who are having felonies reduced to misdemeanors, with the fact that they are trying to put grandmas in jail for years, It is such an unfair prosecution. And we're going to talk with Julie Kelly here in 45 minutes about this. I think the Republican Party has totally failed in their defense of basic justice as it pertains to what's happened to these guys compared to the way that general violent felons are being treated in D.C., and certainly compared to the way all of the BLM protesters are being compared. And Buck, the one I looked at, and I think this is one that Republicans should be slamming and talking about all the time. Do you remember the lawyers who threw the Molotov cocktail in New York City?
Yes, the NYPD.
Did you remember what punishment they ended up getting?
It was very minor.
I'm going to pull up the exact because my jaw dropped when it came out. But when you compare it to the Proud Boys, somebody who is a officer of the court, a lawyer, with an intentional Molotov cocktail, throwing it and lighting a police car on fire. Someone could have easily died there. That's an intentionally violent act. They got a pinprick of the punishment of everybody on January 6th.
The riot, they call it a protest, but it was a riot that broke out in Lafayette Square on May 31st of 2020 when Trump was president. They lit buildings on fire.
Oh, yeah.
They assaulted law enforcement officers all over the place. They were throwing things at cops. There's video of this. And yet I read the entire indictment against Enrique Tarrio, and I sit there and I say, so this is basically, this guy says, look, he said some very dumb things. He certainly, got way too far ahead of himself with thinking all kinds of crazy stuff. Fine. But he didn't actually attack anybody. And to say that he should get 22 years in prison and go alongside the blind sheikh, go alongside al-Qaeda terrorists who want to commit mass murder and tried to and did later on. I mean, it depends on which iteration of their jihadist philosophy or which one of their attacks you're talking about. It's so utterly excessive. And I was reading all this, Clay, and I was thinking to myself, so what would have happened that night on May 31st of 2020 if the Secret Service had said, you know what, we're going to just let some of you guys into the White House. We're going to right this way. They opened the gates. They moved the barricades out of the way, and they let them into the White House. Yeah, there would have been people who broke stuff. There would have been people who went crazy. That's what happened at the Capitol. We've seen the video of it. So you see, why is one side treated like a terrorist insurrection? Of course, that's what they call it. And the other, it's a vibrant First Amendment exercise. Burning down a church next to the White House with a mob screaming crazy things. Yeah, that's First Amendment exercise.
Great point. Here, by the way, the sentences. I thought these were right, but I wanted to make sure we got them right. A judge has sentenced a lawyer to 1 year and 1 day in prison for throwing a Molotov cocktail into a police car and burning it down. There were two of them. The other person got 15 months. So, to contextualize, you intentionally create a violent incendiary device that is often used by terrorist vandals, ne'er-do-wells worldwide, a Molotov cocktail.
Actually, a weapon of war, as we know, created by the Finns to fight against the Soviet invasion of Finland.
Boom. You throw it intentionally in a cop car. Buck, that cop car could have blown up. There could have been a police officer in close proximity. There could have been civilians in close proximity. You are a lawyer, which means you're held to an even higher standard under the law, right? It's not as if you're even just a regular person. 1 year. 1 year in New York City, probably given the lenient release rates of New York City police, probably that person is almost already out. A few months, I would bet, behind bars is what's going to end up being required, and back out on the streets for a Molotov cocktail. How would you justify that if you are a reasonable person and you are comparing what the Proud Boys did with another protest that occurred that was far more violent and that was intentionally violent in nature. I would just love for somebody out there to explain the disparate sentences there. If anything, Buck, wouldn't you think, just being rational human, that you would sentence the Molotov cocktail throwers far more severely than you would anybody associated with January 6th at all?
Well, of course. I mean, any of the violent actions that you can see, and this is a function of what is on video. There's a lot of video of all of the BLM riots, and this also goes into where they're attacking cops and they're doing violent things. And Kamala Harris was helping to raise bail money for them, current vice president.
That's right.
At the time, she was saying, let's get money to these people. Let's get them out as soon as possible. Let's help them. And there's no problem taken with that at all. I believe, and I'm looking for the exact numbers on this, but Andy Ngo, who probably does more to show the radical left, I mean, the Antifa militant radical left than any other journalist in America right now, I think that he had up that the longest, yes, here we go, the longest sentence for a leftist rioter who committed federal crimes in 2020 was in Portland. The guy got 10 years in federal prison for using explosives to try to commit attempted mass murder in Portland. And a leftist group paid his bail to get him out. That guy got 10 years. So incendiary device to commit mass murder, you get less time, half the time of being Enrique Tarrio texting people very stupid things on January 6th, but didn't throw a Molotov cocktail at anybody, didn't actually assault law enforcement. It's tough, Clay. It's tough for people to see this because I know the question, and maybe we should deal with this a little bit. People say, well, you're telling us the problem. What do we do about it? We need the American people to wake up, see what's happening with the answer is we need a majority of the American people to understand something's gone very wrong in our justice system and want to do something about it. There's no easy fix. Anyone who thinks there's an easy fix, I think, is delusional.